So with that, why don't we start the video? So I just would like to make a opening comments on the video. Ellen Rona is our videographer, and she always does a really great job for us. So it's kind of the same touch as we've had in the past. And anyway, without further ado, why don't we just show the video? Jose, please.
Jennifer, I'm gonna play it myself. Can you stop sharing your screen? I'm gonna share mine.
Do we have audio?
What we as human beings can do when faced with what appears to be an insurmountable challenge. But I think it shows what we as human beings can achieve when we put our minds together, when we start beginning to figure out how to combat an adversary, in this case, a biologic entity, a virus. The greatest collaboration of all was the collaboration between not only the ag industry, but also farm worker advocate groups. That was, to me, unprecedented. So many groups banding together, putting aside our disagreements of the past and focusing in on what we saw as necessary, which was the protection of the farm workers, for the protection of agriculture, for the protection of the food that we produce.
Great cooperative effort through all the various different agencies coming together with the ag organizations, as well as the growers, the landowners, the farmers, the processors, the shippers, the harvesters, everybody coming together to make those adjustments to ensure that the essential workers were protected.
Through these collaborative efforts, Monterey County became the first county to advocate for PPE for farm workers. Then it was priority testing, and most recently priority vaccination. These efforts allowed Monterey County to be a leader when it came to being a voice for protecting its essential workers throughout this crisis. The recognition from our ag leaders of the needs of our farm worker community was there from the very beginning. And I think there was a recognition that without these essential workers, those crops would have remained unharvested throughout the last year or so. Monterey County tried to be was an example of what we could do when we work together. And not once through this crisis did we ever think we were doing enough. Every single week, we thought through and we strategized about what more can we be doing, from initiating new programs such as alternative housing program, or deploying nurses to go out into the work sites to educate workers to prevent becoming ill, or to creating wage replacement programs so people knew they were going to lose wages because they were isolating to protect themselves and their families. And as a result of that, even Governor Gavin Newsom created a statewide program based on the alternative housing program that was started right here in Monterey County.
When the pandemic first hit, there was a severe need, a shortage of personal protective equipment, masks, gloves for the farm worker community. And our office was tasked with trying to procure these supplies to then distribute to the ag workers. We worked in cooperation with several different departments, California Department of Office of Emergency Services and California Department of Pesticide Regulation. And we arranged shipments of these PPE items to our office to store. And then we held several distribution events throughout the year for farm workers, pest control businesses. and growers. In August of 2020, lightning strikes caused several wildfires in the Bay Area in Monterey County as well. The smoke from those fires coming from Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, San Benito County, Santa Clara County really affected the air quality in our valley. And in order to help farming continue, we provided N95 particulate masks to the growing community so that their workers could remain safe while still keeping ag industry going.
El año pasado, con la pandemia del COVID, tuvimos una colaboración con la Oficina del Comisionado de Agricultura y el Programa de Promotores Comunitarios de CCA. En esta colaboración, parte de la educación era llevar esta información a los trabajadores del campo, trabajadores esenciales, sobre lo que era la pandemia, lo que era el COVID. Qué eran los síntomas, cómo prevenirlos, pero sobre todo porque era importante hacer la prueba aunque no hubiera síntomas. Una de las principales objetivos era la prevención no solamente del trabajador esencial, sino también de sus familias.
The wine industry is resilient. It always has been, it will continue to be. This has been a challenging year, particularly with the fires and COVID. COVID, we've been able to learn and adapt and actually create new processes based on that were even better than what we were doing before. So we learned how to be better business people from COVID, even though it was really, really hard. The fires are something that were just so actually much more uncontrollable, and they came during our harvest. So we lost a considerable amount, almost half of our harvest was gone. Fortunately, none of the vineyards were affected in terms of the plants being affected. Only the grapes were affected, not the plants. So that's great news.
With the pandemic and the wildfires, and the uncertainty of what to do and how to do it, this presented us with the greatest adversity we had ever encountered. And yet, we continued. The ag industry continued. Our inspection staff continued. The whole industry continued, even though other industries could not. We continued to produce the food that we produce. And yes, there was a significant drop-off in the value of ag for 2020, but still we produced a phenomenal amount of food, of produce, and I'm certain that in 2021, we will be back closer to what we always produce, which is upwards of $4.5 billion annually.
The season last year was difficult for growers because there was less demand. Restaurants were closed. There was just not as much need for a lot of the food, so they grew a lot less. This year, we're seeing an increase in the amount of food that's being planted and harvested and distributed because now we're able to open up a little bit more. And as the pandemic numbers continue to decline, we'll see that increase. And throughout the rest of the season, you would expect by the end of October that it will really be going strong in the fields and production will be about as high as it can be.
Resiliency and resilient are key words here that showed up, and they characterize the actions, the activities that were carried out to ensure that society would stay safe, and that really we received that second life that we all got just by having strategies to protect us from this virus and ultimately having a vaccine that can keep us safe and alive.
The theme, I think, for last year is one, we're resilient. We will get through anything, and we get through it because we have great support from each other, because we're willing to reach out, we're willing to help each other, and this web of partnership in Monterey County, which is incredible. And then not only that, but throughout California and for the wine industry throughout the world, got us through and will continue to lift us up and make us better as an industry.
So I think here in our community locally, I think we did in collaboration, did a fantastic job in making sure that the workforce that produces food was safe and continuing to produce, food for the nation and the world.
I
Very
wanna-
nice.
I think so too. It's a great reflection of not just our panelists, but the stories that kind of stuck, I think, in our minds. I just want to thank the stars of our video, Dr. Max Cuevas, Norm Groot, Farm Bureau of Monterey, Norma Juarez from the Center for Community Advocacy, Ken Allen, one of our staff members, and Kim, one of our stars here as well from the panel. So I want to go now to showing our presentation. We can start with the first slide, Jose.
I'll share my screen.
Okay, very good. Jennifer, thank you.
Mhm.
So this is the picture that incorporates most of the cover from our 2020 crop and livestock report. So a couple things I'd like to point out. One is that you'll see that the word livestock is now a part of our crop report. And I thought that it was appropriate to recognize our livestock industry. We have over a million acres of rangeland where the cattle roam. And so I thought it was appropriate to include them, since we do include them in the crop report, but they should also be included in the title of our report. The other is we were able to come up with some beautiful macro imaging that we use throughout the crop report. And so you can see in the cover, I believe that's a lettuce leaf, which magnified this way, I thought looked very, very artistic. Next slide, please. So I think this year and the past, in 2020, although we've always known that the farm workers are key to our agricultural industry here in Monterey County and elsewhere, we thought that with this new recognition of their essential role within the food and ag sector, we thought it was appropriate that we would have a crop report that describes what they've helped to produce. We felt that it should be in Spanish so that they can also read about it if that's the language that they read in. So for the first time, we've created a Spanish version of the crop and livestock report. So we have two different separate publications. They're identical otherwise, other than one is in English as always, and then this new version in Spanish. So this is the premier year of us producing a crop report in Spanish. Next year, please, or next slide, please. Next, oh, there we go. So the crop report is sprinkled with 6 short stories from members of the community that talk about, in their view, what were key aspects about 2020 and how we responded to really the twin disasters, not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the wildfires that struck the county. And so each one of us in our own way talk about those two disasters and how they impacted agriculture. So I'd like to mention just the names of the authors, see if I can remember here. Norm Groot, again, one of our authors. I wrote this here particular piece. Supervisor Luis Alejo also penned an article for us, as did Rick Tomlinson from the California Strawberry Commission. Let's see who I forgot. Oh, and of course, Kim Stemler also penned an article for us. And then one of our staff, one of our ag inspector biologists who was working in the distribution of the PPE, Patrick Rodriguez, he also penned an article. And then we also have one written for us by Bob Roach, our former assistant ag commissioner, and he's with the Cannabis Association of Monterey County. And I think that's all of them. I think that's all the authors. Am I missing anyone, Jose? I think that's all of them.
Yeah, that's everybody.
Very good. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, please?
Sorry, Henry, I'm getting it for you.
Okay. You know, in this instantaneous world that we live in, if it didn't happen yesterday, it didn't happen.
There you go.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you. This is just a slide to, again, talk about the challenges. You know, every year agriculture has its challenges. As a matter of fact, farmers will probably tell you that every day there are challenges. A tractor breaks down, a new pest is discovered. This always happens, and farming is always responding to challenges on a daily, on an annual basis. Of course, 2020 produced the pandemic, and then the fires to go along with it. So it really challenged the ag industry, and in this adversity, I think the industry really showed its resilience in adapting to new measures to protect themselves. Let's go on to the next slide, please.
I'm having some computer issues. Sorry about that. Henry.
Oh, okay, very good. So, you know, the crop report is basically all numbers. What was the production value? And we spice it up with these articles and pictures and everything to make it a little more appealing. But here's the bottom lines. This is what agriculture looked like in 2020. We had the greatest loss ever, not only in percentage of production at about 11.3% drop, but also in value at almost $500 million loss. It's the first time since, I believe, 2011 that we dropped below the $4 billion mark. As I believe most folks figured this would be a really bad year, and it was that, and it was really the worst year that we've ever had on record. But not everything was bad. If you look here, you'll see that the fruits and nuts group actually moved up a little bit in 2020. The rest of the crop categories stayed approximately the same. Nursery crop took another big drop, which has been the kind of the trend for nursery crops here in the county. But I'm going to get into more of the specifics on the next slide, please. always my favorite way of looking at the crops and what we produce are the top 10 crops. We have a new #1 crop, it's strawberries. And so not only did strawberries move up into the #1 slot above leaf lettuce, but strawberries had its best year ever at almost $1 billion, $922,683,000. And I think this is just a reflection of, well, there's more acreage, nice, good prices overall. But the work of all of the strawberry growers, but with the assistance of the California Strawberry Commission, they've been able to endure and show resilience in adversity in 2020. And this is what's put them above everyone else. Now they're not the only ones. Spinach also moved from the 10th spot in 2019 to the #6 overall spot. That's a highlight. And then we also have celery, which was not even in the top 10 last year, moved up into the top 10 to #9 position. And also livestock and poultry moved into the top 10 from the 11th spot. Brussels sprouts, again, was also another bright spot. These are all commodities that moved up in value. And so just so folks will know, when I speak of value, we're talking about dollars, and it's the amount of dollars that growers receive for their crops in the field, not after they've been enhanced through washing, slicing, dicing, mixing with other vegetables and being put in a bag. It's also important to know that these are gross values. And from these values, from that almost $4 billion, growers must pay their workers, they must pay for their equipment, their fuel, any leases they have, taxes, everything. Everything has to get paid out of that almost $4 billion. And that money is distributed and recycled throughout the community. And what we shown in our most recent economic contributions of Monterey County report, that $4 billion multiplies throughout the community and is really responsible for about $11.1 billion to the local economy. Of course, that's in a more normal year. 2020 was not so much, where we lost so much. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think we're having still. Oh, okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Here's another highlight. Organic production continues to move up. You can see in this slide highlighting organic production. Production went in total acres, moved up from about 88,000 acres to 132 plus thousand acres. The value overall, gross sales went up from 562,702,000 to $757,887,000. So it continues to move in an upward trajectory. You'll notice that the total producers went down by 10. And this is probably a fact of doing business in our country, that although folks tout the small farmer, our systems are really designed for economies of scale. If you can buy a lot of something, you can buy it for cheaper, and that helps people outcompete others. And so that might be what we're seeing here. And I'm sure there's many other factors as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Exports, we have pretty much the same exporting trade partners, and we export the same commodities as we have year after year. But I'd like to point out that if you look at the bottom of this slide at the totals, where we in 2019 exported 327,494,000 pounds of produce, that went up in 2020 to 371,262,000 pounds. Now, anecdotally, what we heard was that as the food service sector closed down due to the pandemic, in some cases, growers were able to get their produce into export markets. So that may be what we're seeing here. Anecdotally, that's what we were told. So another bright spot in the 2020 crop year. Next slide, please. Hemp, not a great producer, but it is a crop that has only been around, I'll say, for 2 years, and this is the first year that there was any value generated out of that. And you can see at the bottom line that we had 11 producers, registered acres, 457 and a half. Only 33 were harvested, and out of that, there was a production of 6,600 pounds. That's about 200 pounds to the acre, and for a total value of $619,000. It's a great beginning. And again, when you have 457 and a half acres, you still have all of the costs that farming requires. So I'm not sure if anybody really made any money, but they, at least on the net side, but gross value, $619,000. Next slide, please. Cannabis production, which has now become very popular as a highlight in our crop report as well. And you can see from this slide, production value went up a very healthy 7.6%, up to, it was a $34.4 million increase. You can see in the 2019, the 2020 totals, it's continued to grow. But again, everybody must be paid for that work, and all the equipment, all of the permits, all of the taxes, all has to come out of there. And we always hope that somebody's making enough to pay for all of the bills, and including management and owners, and if there are any investors out of that. Next slide, please. So that was the last slide, and so I'd like to thank everyone who helped produce this work, especially the growers for providing us all of their numbers. Our staff always puts in a lot of work, and this year, because of the pandemic, you'll see that the crop report's a few more pages, I think 4 more pages than usual, and then coming up with the Spanish version as well. I ask a lot of our staff, and they step up, and I'm very pleased with the overall production of the report, the video, and everything that staff has done to help us illustrate the value of agriculture here in Monterey County every year, and even in a year like 2020. So with that, I want to go through to our panelists and have them give an introduction, if they would like, this regarding the 2020 crop report year. And then at the end, we can have some questions from the media. So Aaron, I remember you were first on the list, so if you would begin, please.
Sure. Thank you, Henry. First, I'd like to thank Jennifer Rosenthal, Bob Roach, and Joey Espinosa for their contributions from the industry for their contribution to the crop report, particularly in relation to the cannabis. I think what we can highlight is that the prices were fairly steady, if not a little higher than they were the year before. I think the average went up probably about $100 to $50 to $100 per pound, which contributed to a healthy top line. Policies that have been implemented by the county are really helping us in taking some of that revenue and regenerating it back into the operations in the form of capital expenditures, so that we move our square footage from the current roughly 4.5 million square feet to closer to the 8 million square feet, or even a little higher than that we could utilize for cannabis cultivation. And that's using basically the existing facilities that we have today. A lot of the greenhouses that you see still have unused portions of them. And so I expect that to change as we reinvest proceeds. We're able to borrow more proceeds as banks come along at reasonable rates. I think you'll see a lot of change in the next couple of years with regard to this industry really maturing. There has been an increase in capital investment, as I said. So we do expect in the next couple of years that our production numbers will come up, but that's also true across the state. And so like what we're seeing with consolidation in the ag world, as you noted in your presentation, I think we will expect to see some consolidation at the grower level, just because the numbers to get in are so high. They're capital intensive, they're operational expense intensive, and eventually those margins shrink, and it gets very competitive. And so I expect us to have to deal with that over the next several years, but also with a maturing and more predictable market. As the crop report stated, the overall revenue generated last year was 20.5 million from the industry. That's a significant benefit to us locally, and I appreciate all of the work that not only the growers have done to raise that revenue, but also in working with the county in making sure we have a program that can do that, and also make it kind of long-term sustainable. As stated in the report, $9.9 million of that revenue, of that tax revenue, was used specifically for COVID relief. Obviously, that's hopefully one-time money that goes out, and we will be able to deploy the revenue from cannabis for other and better purposes in the future. To date, we've received around $40 million in tax revenue total from the industry over the last few years. So I think we are a significant industry here, and I look forward to the long-term future of us being here. With that, I would say that we have to caution. There's a word of caution here. The prices this year are much different. We are already experiencing lower prices, significantly lower prices in many cases. And so while last year was a rosy picture, I want to make sure everyone's aware that most people have gone back to work. The demand isn't as high as it was over through the pandemic, and as such, along with more production, we are already seeing prices drop. And this is just at the start of harvest. So we have a schedule much like Kim's industry and viticulture in the wine industry, and that is that we start harvest very soon, and we end it in about November. And so just at the start of this, we're seeing a drop, and as more product comes online, it may drop even further. So I actually expect 20 to 25% reduction in revenues over the next year. It could be that high. Who knows what will happen? The only other thing I would say, besides thanking you, Henry, and your staff, who've done a phenomenal job in making sure we're we're timely submitting information and gathering it and putting in this crop report. It's always an incredible exercise that you do every year. And so thank you for doing that. The only other thing I would say is that we have a very good relationship with the county in terms of the industry. And I think that's a result of the county taking the initiative to hold industry monthly meetings and inviting virtually anybody who wants in the industry to come into the Zoom meeting, discuss what the problems are with either overtaxation or overregulation, and specifically identify what those problems are. And what we have seen is that the county has turned that around and said, we'll work with you. We see you as a long-term partner. And I think the relationship has really grown over the last year. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Aaron. Next up will be Rick Tomlinson. He is with the California Strawberry Commission.
Thank you, Henry. First, hello, everyone. Rick Tomlinson, President of the California Strawberry Commission. First, I just want to take a moment and share my appreciation for everyone throughout the entire agriculture industry for all the effort during the COVID pandemic. For strawberries, we're very fortunate that we were able to quickly implement a wide range of COVID precautions very early on, and that consumers increased consumption in 2020. And as a result of that, California strawberries is now the largest source of vitamin C from fresh fruit that's available to US consumers. What I'd like to do is just provide you a quick synopsis of the article that's in the crop report. And then, of course, at the end for any questions. In the crop report, you'll see, as Henry mentioned, a brief article, and thank you for inviting us to offer that, Henry. We appreciate being able to contribute. And it starts out just a chronological summary. And so for us, 2 weeks before the shelter-in-place order began, the Strawberry Commission started training farm workers on COVID safeguards and started sending out a wide range of industry notices in English and in Spanish. And in fact, in those first 2 months, we translated more information on COVID safeguards for farms than any other organization in the United States. The daily guidance had become so comprehensive that we put it onto a website and shared it publicly throughout, for all of agriculture to be able to use. And by the third week of March, we had information, training materials, signage, safeguard practices into all the strawberry farms in the state of California. In parallel with all that, we also deployed public service announcements. Beginning in April, we ran television, radio, and social media ads about COVID safeguards produced in English, Spanish, and Mixtec. And they were heard by over 25 million Californians. I think that was the first public service announcements in California on COVID safeguards. While all this was going on, just like many folks in agriculture, and as Henry alluded, some crops that had a much more challenging year, the market collapsed. During those first 2 months for strawberries, we saw $60 million in losses. As that happened, we were just ready to start peak season. And when we come into April through October, California Strawberries employs over 50,000 farm workers. And so we knew as all this was unfolding, there was this choice, and either the crops were going to rot in the field or we were going to pick every single box. And it was really critical that we pick every single box, because that's over $1 billion in salaries to all of our rural communities. And so the industry made that pledge that we were going to do that. And one of the things we did is we quickly turned to US Department of Agriculture at the time. We asked them to use their emergency funding powers to purchase strawberries to stabilize the marketplace. And as a result of our efforts, combined with many in agriculture, including my colleagues here today, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced the purchase and distribution through food banks and other nonprofits of more than $3 billion of 12 fruit and vegetable crops, including strawberries. So between the commitment of the industry to work in the supply chain with retailers and the emergency action by USDA, that really helped to stabilize the marketplace. And then that's when we started to see the numbers turn. And as the crop report indicates, we had really a huge surge by consumers in demand for strawberries. And so, like I said, as a result, strawberries is now the largest source of vitamin C from fresh fruit to US consumers. And that could not have happened without the commitment and hard work of everybody, starting first with the farm workers. Really an amazing effort by everyone, including, most importantly, the farm workers and everybody in the food supply chain. So thank you to my colleagues, to Monterey County for the opportunity to share in the crop report, and our biggest thanks to everyone in the supply chain, and most importantly, the farm workers in our counties.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, we're here from Chris Valadez, President of the Growers Shippers Association of Central California. Chris, please.
Hey, good morning, Henry, and everybody on Zoom. Thank you for the opportunity. I guess first I'd congratulate the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's Office. I think, it wasn't without, significant challenge, not only onto industry, but all that support, provide support, regulate, deal with, or involved with industry, the ability to best try to encapsulate what was a whole year of just unprecedented challenge onto every corner and cranny of the industry. I think you did a really good job, and your office did a really good job in doing so in a report, which isn't easy to do when yes, we're looking back, but in many ways, in many corners of the ag sector, we're still in the midst of the pandemic from a public health and safety perspective, but also supply and demand and market-based challenges, which is really what your math and your report picks up. So I'll applaud you for that. I think a couple things I'd like to add, one of which is timing, and what was the effect of the timing of the pandemic. I think you've learned a lot. We've shared a lot as a community of agricultural interest in what we did to be as proactive as we could, as early as we could, which I think that story resonates throughout the report and throughout the accounts. But also, I think it's important to reflect upon, well, why are the numbers so down, particularly for other crops? If you look at leafy greens and lettuce, and you look at, the onset of the pandemic and how that coincided with shutdown orders, whether it was here in our county, statewide, and throughout the nation. A shutdown that happened in March and that carried forward for many months thereafter. I mean, that coincided. That was a perfect storm with respect to timing with what was the onset of harvest activity based on plantings that were made in earlier in the winter, which were now coming due, so to speak, in that spring. And so you had just this, you think of stocks, the crash, you had a crash of significant proportion that was unprecedented that happened because as a society, we just froze. We were in this state of crisis because we are now, we were all now dealing collectively with what do we do in a pandemic, and the responsible actions were taken at the time to limit our ability as people to interact and try to social distance, space out, which led to, as we all know, the shutdown, literally the shutdown of institutional sectors of the food service sector, which is a high, it's a huge customer, particularly for leafy greens that are produced here in the valley, upwards of a third to, in some cases half, in some cases for some operations, they're almost exclusively designed to serve those food service markets, those hotels, those cruise ships, you name it, right? Anything where there's an institutional purpose for the procurement of, large scale and large volumes of food, particularly leafy greens for, the distribution and consumption from the American public. that went away literally overnight. And so, what we saw was not only, I think, as reflective in your report, the negative aspects and the reaction from that, but you're also seeing, it wasn't, for example, leaf and head lettuce dropping from, 1 or 2 to 10. You also saw, again, this market resiliency where, consumers and the available outlets for us to continue to consume, nutritious berries, as Rick described, or other fruits, wine, leafy greens that are produced here in the Salinas Valley. Really, that demand shifted significantly over into what was the retail sector, and as restaurants and others pivoted for, takeout models and the proliferation and of DoorDash and other type of at-home delivery services was really what became, for a big segment of 2020, the primary outlets for the delivery of many products that we grow and produce here from the Salinas Valley, the salad bowl of the world, and that's a significant point because we were just ending, particularly for leafy greens, the Yuma season, that fall winter season, and the spring season literally, I think, dealt the producers in this region this flawed hand of, not only do you have the human health aspect of trying to figure out, what is best to do, what can we proactively do to help protect the health and the well-being of everybody in the workplace, but now how are we going to keep up with demand while seeing that we are, a critical infrastructure sector who is responsible, who literally has, public security, national security related responsibility to continue to provide, in this case, fruits and nuts and leafy greens and other commodities that are produced by and large over a certain period of time. We are the majority of producer of these, very healthy, very nutritious, but also very perishable products. And that has been a significant, that's a significant kind of effect and underlying, I think, wave of what has been our 2020 experience. The other item that I will point out that I think receives attention, quite fortunately, it receives attention from our ag commissioner and our ag commissioner's office, but there are nuances with the report that also give kind of the how and the why to why did we see a drop for certain commodities, particularly for lettuce. If you go back to 2020, we had excessive and prolonged sustained heat in August and September, which definitely affected, crop quality. But that coincided with not only the damage that we experienced from pests and diseases, namely, impatiens necrotic spot virus, which is carried by the Western flower thrip, in addition to Pythium wilt, soil-borne disease. I mean, those two, and there are others, but those two in and of itself, for some fields throughout the Salinas Valley, accounted for anywhere from a third all the way up to near 100% crop loss, exacerbated by climate and climate-related changes, in this case, sustained heat in August and September, but that manifested itself in making the crop really, really non-marketable. It was crop damage. And so, that happened, if I track it from this point moving forward, it was really around this time. It was as we're approaching kind of July and moving into August is when we started seeing these elevated temperatures and their negative impact onto the crop, where it was just sustained. There was no relief, there was no cool down happening, and it just stressed the plant, I think the ecology weakened in a way that made it more susceptible to pest and disease, that I think had a really big impact onto what was then the quality and thus the marketability of products, and namely lettuces grown from this region. I will close in saying I'm very proud. I'm very proud of not only the employers, not only of the ability of the employers and the employees to, at a time where they're interdependent like no other onto each other, to really work together and work through, I think, a system as best as you can design it of trust to help deliver programs and services from PPE to housing to now vaccination into 2021 testing. But I'm also extremely proud, and I know the type of extraordinary progress, and we're still working through all of our COVID challenges, but the extraordinary progress that has been made that is quite frankly unique because of the models that are in place here in Monterey County in this region are really not possible without the partnerships and the parties that are party today, from Norm to Kim to Rick, Aaron, and there are really a handful of others in addition to the broader community support that has been there, I think, for most of these steps along the way to help enable support and add to what have been proactive efforts taken upon themselves by the ag employer to just survive and to just protect people as best as was possible during a challenging time. So I'm proud to be part of this group in this region and a contributor to all that has been success. And I think the continued effort moving forward to maintain our resiliency and transition from resiliency to even more progress for the community. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Next up, can we hear from Norm, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Norm Groot. I'm the Executive Director for Monterey County Farm Bureau. And I'm going to start my remarks too by saying that, you know, we came together as an ag community this last year, and the partnership, the tremendous partnership of not only the faces that you see here in the Hollywood Squares on this particular Zoom, but, you know, Supervisor Alejo and Supervisor Lopez and others in the county government also helped considerably with this partnership, and we were in constant communications. And I do want to acknowledge also the support of the hospitality industry as we got through all of this, and really coming together and working towards solutions as we went through almost on a day-to-day basis of different crises and different changing paradigms that we had to deal with and interpret and figure out how they applied locally here. So I appreciate all of us on the call here working together well and getting through this. And, you know, it's looking a little better, but we're not quite there yet, and we hope to continue that. But it does highlight in the 2020 crop report that it illustrates the changes that all growers, vineyards, shippers, processors, and labor contractors experienced in this full year of pandemic and wildfires. And it's not only reflected in the numbers in this report, but also in the narratives that you'll find. And while strawberries did become one of the bright spots in an otherwise really regressive year, the resilience of local farming and ranching shined when having to pivot the changing marketplace conditions almost on a daily basis. Modified workplace safety rules, and the environmental disaster of the wildfires. The sudden shift to shelter in place in March 2020 left much of the product in the supply chain that really had no market outlet suddenly, almost overnight. There was an immediate pivot to different markets for many growers and shippers, and there was an immediate reduction in food service volumes and canceled commercial contracts causing that. While the retail supply chain maintained some balance as more people ate their meals at home, the devastation of the other supply chain outlets forced much product to either be donated, dumped, or plowed under. Losses were substantial in those first months of the pandemic, but agriculture was successful in pivoting as the market demands changed and ultimately as the market stabilized. Then keeping our essential farm workers safe was a primary effort on the part of all ag employers. When PPE was largely unavailable in the commercial situations and the constraints that were suddenly put on that area of the market, the local ag associations in coordination with our ag commissioner's office secured supplies of PPE that could then be distributed free of charge to any and all farm operators and processing facilities that needed it. This effort eventually yielded over 2 million pieces of PPE that were distributed locally. These were coordinated efforts, and agriculture was able to pivot and respond. Farm operations became inventive about how they harvested their crops due to social distancing requirements laid out by multiple agencies. Multiple passes through a field were necessary to harvest crops. Plexiglass shields had to be installed on harvest equipment, and buses had to make multiple trips to and from the field just so they could space their riders. Even break areas had to be reimagined to comply with these new distancing requirements. But again, agriculture was able to successfully pivot. The challenges of wildfire are not just to rangelands and vineyards that were at risk for physical damage, but also to air quality throughout the Monterey County region. Farm workers needed to be protected, and again, more PPE was needed. during those multiple weeks of really smoky air quality. Crops were indeed impacted, and particularly grapes, but farm operations once again pivoted to protect their harvest crews and their other essential workers. Then, with the announcement of the vaccine approvals, agricultural associations immediately began lobbying for dedicated vaccination clinics for farm workers. We recognized that there would be thousands of farm workers returning to our county in the early spring season to help harvest our early season crops. With the aid of Supervisors Alejo and Lopez, as well as what the Grower Shipper Association and Clinica de Salud accomplished jointly, vaccination supplies were secured, and with the help of farm employers, supplying crew lists, farm workers were vaccinated to the estimated rate of 72% to date. Again, agriculture was able to respond and lead the way. This past year shows the resilience of our farming operations, our processing facilities, and our supply chains. It was a great accomplishment to achieve all those changes in what was a most challenging year. We should all be proud of how the agricultural community was able to come together and respond quickly to the adversity caused by circumstances well beyond all of our control. I do want to thank Henry Gonzalez, our Ag Commissioner, and his hardworking, dedicated staff for putting together another really good, comprehensive crop report this year, along with the livestock information. You did a great job. It really reflects the tone of what we had to go through this past year in 2020. So thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you, Norm. Next up, we have Kim Stemler, Executive Director of the Monterey County Vintners and Growers Association.
Thank you all so much. And again, thank you to Henry and the staff for putting this together, but more than that, for your ongoing support. We've had a long relationship with the Ag Commission. We've always worked with Ag Commissioners, but this year we text multiple times a day with each other. The relationship got so much stronger, and not only the Ag Commissioners, but all of us as partners. I've never seen a stronger web of partnership between the ag community as we have witnessed this year. And because of this, we were able to keep our respective industries and the larger community much safer than would have been without our collective efforts. And this collective effort continues. So quickly to that end, and this is slightly off topic, but with the increasing rise of the Delta variant in cases in the county, media partners, if any business, whether they're ag or not, needs a group of people vaccinated or tested, reach out to any one of us. We have systems in place to get people vaccinated and tested. So if anybody, we really want you to help with that promotion because we have to stop this variant. Okay, back to wine grapes. So 2020 was a really difficult year for wine grapes. Grape growing is actually well suited to the COVID safety requirements. And as an example, people already work in vineyard space between rows. So in terms of social distancing, that actually wasn't really hard for us because we already social distance as a normal part of our practice in non-pandemic years. So the industry, in terms of adapting, didn't have as much adaptation to do to keep everyone working safely and productively. And that actually is also true in wineries, although I'll primarily talk about vineyards right now. Unfortunately, the wildfire during harvest really hurt us so much. It caused a reduction in value of 43% over 2019. There was a reduction in yield of 29%, a little under that, over 20 or under 2019. So there's a difference there. And the story behind the difference is that the fires impacted mostly the higher value northern and central regions, wine grape growing regions of Monterey County, not the southern regions where we can grow a lot of grapes in the valley that produce high yield and large scale production. So that's why that difference is there. Also, I want to point out that this monetary reduction only represents the value of grape sales, not the value added production of wine and the sales of that in this supply chain. So that's really significant. And we haven't felt the loss of that yet. I predict that we'll feel that more in 2022. The reduction was actually caused by several things. There are three primary reasons. Some grapes were actually damaged. Their grape skins were damaged. It's called smoke taint, and it changes the flavor of the grape. It actually changes the chemical profile. Then the others were more systems issues. There was an overwhelm in labs that do the testing. So if you recall, it wasn't only Monterey County that had fires. Napa had fires, Sonoma had fires, and other smaller wine regions also were on fire at the same time, and we were all in harvest. So we didn't have the testing capacity needed to manage rapid testing. So without knowing if grapes were impacted, wineries didn't want to accept the grapes. Now, this was a big problem. It also, just like it caused, COVID definitely caused us to be more connected. These fires have caused the wine industry throughout the world to be more connected. The key lab in California that everybody used was behind 42 days in testing. Wine grapes don't have 42 days to sit around and wait before wine is made. You need a turnaround of at least 1 day, maybe 2. So we ended up reaching out to labs throughout the world. At one point, we were sending people in Monterey County, sending their grapes to British Columbia. And then we told them to send them to Australian labs. And then it was New Zealand labs. So we were connected throughout the world with labs and people trying to help us. Another issue is that we have crop insurance. Many of our growers have crop insurance, and crop insurance requirements. If you're going to make a claim on crop insurance, grapes are not allowed to leave vineyards. So many people, growers just said, well, I can't test my grapes. I don't know if they're affected. And I'd rather get some money from my crop insurance than allowing them to leave and then find out they are impacted and not getting any money. So they're the three main reasons. Grapevines themselves are very resilient and do not burn easily. They're actually considered, vineyards act like fire breaks for wildfire fighting, and they really play a beneficial role in fires. So if there was an impact from the fires and the impact of the wine industry in all of California, honestly, there happened to be an abundance of juice in the market, of wine available in the market. That is no longer available. So we got rid of all of the abundance of wine that was out there. So I guess the supply demand has been balanced now. And as you know, wine grapes are a perennial specialty crop. So even with our big hit, we're in this for the long haul. A vine takes at least 3 to 5 years after being planted to produce fruit that's even usable for wine. And then once you make the wine, it takes a year or maybe longer. If you're making bubbles in the traditional method, it could take 4 or 5 years from that. So grape growers are committed to this industry and in it for the long haul. We're resilient, and we're learning how we can continue to better protect our workers through all of this, how to better protect our land and our vines and our businesses and our community. So let's talk about 2021, because we really want to get rid of 2020. So far this year, nature is cooperating from a quality perspective. We have had pretty optimal growing conditions for wine grapes with a mild climate at just the right time. And even though we've had heat waves throughout the state, the Salinas Valley hasn't been terribly impacted with those, and let's hope that continues. And although there was a recent fire that provoked tons of anxiety and reminded us to refine our systems throughout ag, it didn't impact our grapes. It was too early, so we're fine there. And right now we're looking at a yield that's slightly higher than average as long as everything stays this way, and actually a few weeks later. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to our media partners, because you really helped us get information out, and I definitely appreciate that. And to all my buds here, look forward to working together, and maybe not in crisis situations all the time. and your wine industry is here to serve you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Kim. So now I want to open it up for questions from the media that may be on the Zoom. If you could raise your hand, or if you would like, you could submit a question via chat, and if you can direct it to someone. If not, we'll see who the most appropriate person is to answer the question. We might take volunteers. But if there are
Henry,
no
Edgar Oliveris has a question, and I think it's directed to row crops.
Very good. So
I can read it if you like.
would you please? I don't.
Yeah. Edgar says, good morning. How this production decrease hit the farmers' economy? Did they have to fire farm workers or get money from credits to face the pandemic, or they just went throughout this situation by themselves?
Norm or Chris would be perhaps the most appropriate.
I'll tag team it with Norm. I'll give a remark and then turn it to Norm. So no, we did not have any experiences of firings due to, marketplace losses and the ability to sell or move crop into the market. But you also have to recognize, last year there was a lot of, I'd call unequal policies that were put into place that helped some but excluded others. So for example, you had an opportunity to claim federal payroll tax credits for all businesses, but you were excluded from being able to enjoy those tax credits as a means to help support what were then COVID-19 related paid sick time obligations if you're a larger employer or had more than 500 or so employees. And so, that there were a lot of operations, clearly, if you're talking about agriculture and production here at the scale at which it is in many cases, that were under tremendous pressure and tremendous stress just to continue to operate. So it wasn't all unlike the story that Mr. Tomlinson described, where, farming operations had to make a decision, and in most cases they continue to harvest. However, where there wasn't harvesting and there wasn't layoff, but there just wasn't harvesting, was largely due to where, crops were damaged or quality was damaged because of, pest and disease damage. You could have had some scenarios because of the market crash from the food service side, an inability for those crops. And so outside of local food and feeding programs, there is no market. And so in all cases, you can't go upside down all of the time to harvest a crop when you can't even sell that crop and reclaim your cost and afford to pay your employees and continue to reinvest in your company. And so, it wasn't without challenges. And thankfully, in some cases, some farming operations were fortunate in being able to take advantage of some programs that were available for moments in time to just help them with business continuity.
Thank you.
I'll just add too that I think, quite the opposite was probably true, that most farm operations were doing their best to retain their farm workers through all of this, because we have had a labor shortage here for several years now, and it's not that easy to reacquire labor in agriculture should you find that you suddenly need it. So I think quite the opposite was true, that all ag employers, as much as they possibly could, appreciated and maintained their employment levels.
Very good. Thank you, Norm. Is there another question?
Yes, Henry, James Herrera is asking, in previous years, cannabis was included as a separate supplement because it is still considered a Schedule I drug by the federal government. This year, it is part of the crop report. What changed?
Well, a couple of things. One, it is still separate. It's not added to the total of our traditional non-cannabis crops. The only one we would add would be industrial hemp. It's still, those numbers are still separated from the rest, and that's in part because at the federal level, they're still dealing with it as a Schedule I drug. But that it's really looking like that's going to change at the federal level. And last year we we put it in there with some sticky material to have it staying within the crop report, but it could be easily extracted. And this year I thought that we wouldn't go through that additional cost and just put it in there. And really it's just another attempt to normalize cannabis as another crop.
Henry, we have one other question in the chat here from Mark Anderson. He says, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the insight. Not sure who to direct this to, but I'd love to hear more about what, if any, programs / responses modeled here were exported around the country and the world beyond the farm worker testing and vaccination program.
I'd like to go again to Chris. I think Chris and perhaps Norm.
Yeah, I have an example. So outside of vaccination and testing, actually COVID-19 housing, in the video you'd received the remark from Supervisor Alejo, not only about the state's Housing for the Harvest program, but that it was patterned after a program which originated here in Monterey County because of the ag employers. And so as you may recall, or maybe you don't, in late March, we were able to create a COVID-19 housing program for farm workers, whether they were COVID-19 exposed or positive, relying upon the knowledge that a farmer or a farming operation or agricultural operation would have had or may come upon with respect to, was there a work site exposure that's known and then recorded that they can take action to try to isolate and help folks to quarantine. Did an employer learn from an employee or from a crew leader that somebody in a crew may have been with somebody and had commented to their coworkers that they were somewhere on a weekend and somebody exhibited symptoms? It enabled the farmer and farming operations and the employer to really approach in a proactive manner, but also discreet and with dignity their employees to identify if you have a need, if you'd like to quarantine or isolate free of charge with medical observation, with food. If there are barriers because there's other people in the home, say you're a mom and you have a teenage daughter and you don't want to leave her at home because you live with 7 other people and you're just not comfortable being away from your child, here's a program that could accommodate your needs while keeping your daughter close to you in any one of an array of hotel properties that we had secured throughout last season. And actually, we still continue to operate it here in Monterey County for our employers, for ultimately to protect and help the farm workers themselves. That program actually, because of a record of access, efficiency, comfort, and trust amongst the employers and the employees in taking their offer for that housing, we were able to export that out of this county, so down into Imperial County and also into Arizona, given the symbiotic relationship between operations here and there, some of which are the same, some of which are interconnected. The program that started here and that was operated here ultimately was operated in other counties in addition to California and in the state of Arizona. And so we were proud to see that. But I'll tell you, and again, this goes back to, I think, the level of intensity and focus put onto employers here in this region, and we should be proud of all the employers represented by the folks here on this panel. It's not without significant effort. These things don't just happen. They don't just happen even when there's a funding source. That you have to have a mechanism in place that, with dignity, with respect, with trust, that you can approach and have a comfortable conversation without any accusation associated with it, with your employees, that labor and management can actually work together to share information and then thus make services available. And fortunately, we have that experience here and we're able to transfer that to other locations in the state and in other states.
Very good. Anyone want to add to that?
I'll just add, there's one other item that I think we should highlight here, and that's something that everyone who you're seeing on the screen here worked together on collaboratively, and that is the advisory for agricultural worker protections. We actually issued the first one in the state of California on the 3rd day of our shelter in place order here, which was in March of 2020, and updated it another 6 times throughout the early seasons of the pandemic. when we had further information from all the public health agencies as well as our local county health department. That became a model for not only other counties in California, but other specialty crop production areas throughout this country. We noticed that it was being picked up in a lot of different places. And because we were the first ones to really take that on and tackle it, so to speak, and work together to comprehensively issue this advisory document, it became the model. So that was I think one of our better success stories, even though it was a scramble to keep up with all the information and interpret it oftentimes for how it applied to specialty crops. I think we did a really good job of setting the pace, and we were recognized for that, not only for our housing program that the governor highlighted, but also for this advisory that both the governor and our California Department Food and Agriculture Secretary Karen Ross also noted. So great job here setting the pace and leading the way.
And I would just add, that's a really good example of where you have to take all this complex information and guidance that is, got to capture every single scenario when it's put out by the government. And then you need industry folks to look through that and sift out, how do you apply it to a farm? How do you apply it to a harvest environment? How do you apply it in a processing facility? And that's where you get into the specific guidance and action. And from day one with the whole group, the county, the supervisors, actively engaged in putting that kind of guidance together. Absolutely. I think that's a really good example. Chris mentioned the housing. I would just add to that training. We had calls from other state governments asking us about the training materials that we had put out. We have a sister organization in Mexico, Ana Berries, that works with all the berry farms in Mexico. And because we translate all of our information into Spanish, easily, quickly adapted in Mexico. Same thing in Florida. When this all hit, Florida was wrapping up their season, but they were still in production. So training, that guidance, the housing, lots of examples.
If I can just mention something to emphasize
Please.
what all of you have said. We were, even though everybody was reactive to COVID, we were proactive. We didn't only wait for, remember, nobody knew what was going on. There weren't regulations. Everything was unclear. So we were trying to be out there doing stuff without a lot of guidance, interpreting the guidance as well, but also being proactive in creating protocols and systems that we thought were right for the system when there wasn't a lot of guidance. And I think that's a really important aspect.
Thank you, Kim. I'll just add that the advisory that Norma spoke about, we also translated it into Spanish because many of our growers are primarily Spanish speakers. So next question, if there is one.
There's a question from Celia Jimenez. Henry, it says, losses during the first months of the shelter in place were greater than the previous year. Do you have any numbers comparing those months to 2019? Also, which sectors / crops were the most impacted?
So we don't have really good numbers for those specific crops that suffered at the beginning of the pandemic. We did conduct a survey of growers initially, and I believe this was on April 24th that we conducted a survey because we had been hearing anecdotal information that there was all of these cancellations of contracts, that fields were being dissed, that all of these impacts of the COVID pandemic. And so we wanted to get something a little bit more real to be able to speak to that. And so we did conduct a survey. We had a good response from growers, and indeed it verified that there was losses. We don't have, it was not a comprehensive survey, so we don't really have numbers for that particular part of the year. What we have is the crop report that we're presenting for you here. Every year there are disasters, and the Ag Commissioner's Office is tasked with evaluating and conducting surveys or doing whatever needs to be done to find out what were the losses based on that particular disaster. And so the pandemic was no different in that regard. We did do that for the fires, and that report does go to the United States Department of Agriculture for potential programs to assist with the losses. And for the fires, I know we came up with a total of $74.5 million loss. Just double check my figures. Yeah, $74,586,292 of losses just from the fires, and most of that was grapes. Strawberries were also impacted due to the. But no, we don't have more specific figures than that, other than our abbreviated early season survey.
Henry, we have one more question from James Herrera. Production gross value fell more than 11% in 2020. What are your projections for 2021?
Well, let me consult with my crystal ball. We're still in the pandemic. But I think that fortunately for us, we've continued with these efforts, these partnerships that developed in early March, partnerships that already existed, but were enhanced with us partnering with other organizations, with farm worker advocate groups in particular. That partnership really helped us. And really one of the principal partnerships I think that will help us in 2021 is that the partnership between the Growers Shippers Association, led by Chris Valadez here, and the Clínica de Salud del Valle de Salinas, led by Dr. Max Cuevas, and getting the farm workers vaccinated. And there was many others, the county health department and others who contributed to that effort. But we really went from a really high infection rate for farm workers to a phenomenally low amount of infections for farm workers due to these efforts that occurred weekend after weekend after weekend. And it was phenomenal. And that, I believe, is going to help us turn it around and really be resilient in this adversity that we're still dealing with now with the resurgence of the Delta virus. So I think that I do not believe we're going to have an 11.3% drop. As a matter of fact, I'll be as bold to say that there will be an increase from 2020 over 2021 will increase over 2020. I can't say how much, but I think it'll be closer to what we've always had, which is we've averaged right around $4.4 billion. Will we make up that 500 million? I really hope we do. We might be a little short, but I'm certain that we'll be closer to that $4.5 billion mark. Anybody else have their crystal ball out?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I'm gonna back your bet, Henry. But I will express caution. This winter was a little colder than normal for a little longer than normal. And so our crop production in Monterey County this year is behind about 30 days, right? So we have effectively about 30 days worth of volume that has not been harvested for this year. So we'll see how the year progresses. Right now, things are doing well. And like I said, I'm optimistic, but a little bit of caution from the effects of this winter.
Very good. Others?
This might be hard to capture in your farm report next year, but for leafy greens, namely, your lettuce, they've had 4 months of relatively poor markets. And so, some of that is simple as supply and demand. That's a COVID story though. I mean, that goes to, planting schedules, you're trying to anticipate, what you're based on contracts and based on other business arrangements, what the demand is going to be. And while you do have, school started somewhat in some places, you have, vacations and hotels and conferences and things like that that are starting to pick up. I think your crop report will show next year kind of some depressing element for at least that first productive quarter and then some. But if we track from this moment in time moving forward, hopefully we see, what ends up being a stabilization, if not a rebound for at least the lettuce side of the Salinas Valley. That's what we're hoping for anyways.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Aaron already gave his report on what cannabis was looking this year. So I think that we're going to have to end now. I just want to again give thanks to our panelists of experts here for their time and efforts and sharing their experience and with the 2020 crop and livestock report year. I want to say that also at 10:30, which it's 10:31, I'm supposed to be presenting the same report to our board of supervisors, and I plan to do that in person. So I'll have to rush off at this time, but you can feel free to send us questions, and we'll try to find you answers to your questions. I want to also share that our crop report and the video will both be on our newly revamped website. It's supposed to be much more user-friendly. I encourage you to go there. You can see it, and we highlight the crop report, many aspects of it, and you can download the entire report, and also again visit or watch the video again. So with that, again, thank you very much. Thank you, Jose and Jennifer, for your assistance, and everyone be well and hope to see you soon. Thank you.